So now let's spend some time around our human resources. Remember, we talked about this part of the budget is somewhere between 40 and 50% of what we budget, of what we actually spend. So we really need to think through that. The closer to 40 we are, the better off we are. The closer we get to 50, you're really taking away time, really taking away funds that you can use for raises as going forward. So make that 40-50 really important, and it does include all the cost. I'd like to divide this into 3 sessions as we think through this. Let's begin with the lay factor of lay employees. Now, lay employees in the local church are treated like employees in any other business. They are employees of the church. We've got to abide by the wage and hour laws. We've got to be sure that if our employees are exempt, that means that they control part of the work. They are responsible for the work they do. Everything they do is not governed by someone else that tells them how to do it. They've got responsibility for management, for decision making. They're exempt. We can work them 24/7, 365 and pay them a set salary. And that's fine. That's what an exempt employee is. Our non-exempt employees are those that work at the direction of the exempt employees. We've got to be certain that we don't misuse people. We don't require them to work and not pay them the overtime. And so if I'm responsible for telling them what to do and how to do it, I would govern their time that they're working, which could end up, through no fault of theirs, all fault of administrative, working overtime. And if we're paying them a salary, then we're cheating them. And the last thing we want to do is cheat people, God's people. So if a person is a non-exempt employee, they can work 40 hours at regular time, and anything over 40 becomes time and a half. Now, a lot of people think that because we have the secretary of our church works 20 hours a week, and she would be or he would be a non-exempt employee, then if they work 30 hours, we've got to pay them time and a half for that extra 10, and that's not what we're saying. We set a rate for what the regular hours are, and Congress and the Department of Labor have defined that as 40 hours. And so if we're paying them minimum salary, minimum wage rate is $7.25. So you want to be sure you follow that. I'm going to pay them $7.25 at minimum for every hour they work 40 and under. If they work more than 40 hours, they're going to get time and a half for the extra work. Now, if you're in a holiday week, if you're, let's take Thanksgiving, and let's say that the church secretary worked 40 hours on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, 10 hours a day getting everything ready because he knew he was going to be off Thursday and Friday and Saturday of that week. But he gets holiday pay, 8 hours for Thursday and 8 hours for Friday. So what are we fixing to pay the secretary for 56 hours? Because the 16 hours were non-worked hours, they're paid at straight pay. So it's 40 at straight pay and 16 at straight pay. Now, if that had been just a normal week and the person worked 56 hours, 40 Sunday through Wednesday, and 16 on Thursday and Friday, and they worked those hours, then it's time and a half for the 16 hours and regular time for the 40 hours. Do not mistreat people and make them work and not compensate them for their work. So we want to be certain that we understand that exempt and non-exempt. Second thing we want to understand is we need personnel files on everybody. Inside that personnel file is everything related to their job, their compensation, their performance. And those personnel files are always open to the employee. They're kept under lock and key by the HR director or the person responsible, and they're available to the people to go in and look at anytime. Now, inside there, as the treasurer, I'm going to have an I-9, a W-4, and a state withholding. Make sure I'm paying the right people the right thing. I've got their Social Security number, their address. I'm doing their withholding. Everything I'm supposed to do, I'm going to have those inside of there. Then I'm going to have in there their application, the approval of their pay rate, the approval of any pay raises, and then we will have the evaluations that go on. You may do those quarterly, you may do those annually. That's up to you. But those would be in that personnel file. Now, I said you're going to have an I-9. Now please, please, please remember this. I-9s should not be a part of the personnel file of each individual. The I-9 should be maintained in a separate folder inside the personnel file drawer with all the I-9s in one place. And that's simply because if the Department of Labor comes in and wants to look at your I-9s, if they're in the folder with everything else, you've got to give them the full personnel folder. But if you've got them together in one folder, you can hand them the I-9s and you're through. Be sure you're using current versions of these forms and that you have them in the files as they're supposed to be. Also be certain that if you have a person working 30 hours or more and you're a large employer, over 20 employees, full-time employees, that you're providing health insurance. The Affordable Care Act says a person is full-time if they're working 30 hours. So you see, it gets really confusing. I like to say you got to figure out what field you're playing in baseball. Am I left field, center field, or right field? If I'm in the healthcare field, full-time is 30 hours. If I'm in the Department of Labor field, full-time is 40 hours. If I'm inside of wage and hour, it's 40 hours. And so I've got to know what I'm trying to accomplish as I look at these personnel files. So be certain that you offer insurance, and if the person says they do not want insurance, or if you're providing a pension program and they do not want it, have them sign off that they don't want it. Without that, how do you prove that the person didn't want it when they're saying they did? It just solves the problem. So if you think about lay employees and their taxes, you must withhold Social Security and Medicare. I don't care if it's the one-time fill-in musician for the pianist on a Sunday morning that you paid $25 to, or it's the youth director that you're paying $30,000 to. I've got to withhold taxes. Social Security at 6.2%, Medicare at 1.45%, and I match those dollars because they're lay employees and we have to match what we withhold. And then we withhold state and federal income tax based on the W-4 and the state withholding form. I've got to pay those taxes on a timely basis, at least quarterly. And it depends on the level of the money coming in. So look at that 941, it'll help you determine that. I suggest, regardless of the level, to pay it every month. Because if I've withheld money and I get into the second month or the third month and money's low and I don't pay that in, that is actually a misuse of funds. Because in trust, I took money out of the employee's paycheck and I did not turn it over in the trust that they gave me to withhold their money. So I suggest a monthly federal tax deposit. If it's over $2,500, again, you can do that once a quarter. If it's under $2,500, you can do that once a quarter. But that's not a good practical practice. Practicality says pay it every month. Be sure you file the 941s quarterly. Make sure that you file your state tax deposit, and they'll tell you whether you're going to be quarterly or you're going to be monthly. Quarterly, you're going to make sure your deposits are done, your 941s are done. There's a 944 form that once a small employer, like our small churches that just have the pastor, or maybe the pastor and a part-time secretary, they can file a 944, which is once a year, but you can't file it till the IRS says you can file it. So file your 941s, and when they say you can do a 944, then you can move to to annually. But it's important to remember when I move to annually, now my money moves to annually that I'm going to pay out. And it's even more important now to make those deposits monthly and file the form annually. Don't forget your W-2s and W-3s. You file them with the Social Security Administration and the state of Mississippi, and those are done annually. So a lay employee in a local church is just like a lay employee at Wendy's or Walmart or the law firm or the doctor's office or anywhere else they happen to work. The rules are the rules. And if we're going to be good Christians, shouldn't we follow the rules? Somewhere in the Bible you'll find it says, render unto Caesar that that's Caesar's, and unto God that that's God's. It's our responsibility to file these reports for our employees and pay over what we've withheld. Also remember, the discipline says that we should look at pensions for our lay employees over 20 hours a week. It doesn't say that we must provide it. It says we must look at it. And Westpath is a wonderful place to provide pensions to your employees. And you can allow them to put their own money up. You can match their money. You can do whatever you want to do. You set the rules. But remember, the rules are the same for everybody. So watch that with your lay employees. Be sure you've got those done. Now, a lot of y'all like to refer to your employees as contractors, or we're going to give them a stipend. And to you, this means that I don't have to withhold any taxes and I don't have to keep up with it. Well, that's not the way it plays, folks. Whether it's a stipend, whether it's a contract, or whether it's an employee, all is laid out in the law. So if we begin to think about the employee versus contractor, let's look at it this way. This only applies to laity. Clergy who are not appointed, it would apply to them. And what we've got to do is determine the status. Are they an employee or are they a contractor? Now there's 4 different ways to look at this. You know, always fun to have a different way to look at it. We can look at the common law employee test. Oh, we can look at the IRS 20-factor test. Supreme Court said, hey, here's 12 rules that you can do, and then the tax court followed it up with 7 rules. It's really simply this. How much control do I have over how the person does the job? How much direction do I give them? How much investment does the employee or contractor have in the facilities or the equipment? If I've got a lawn service that's coming in that spends $30,000 to $40,000 a year on buying equipment, well, you can bet they're a contractor. But if I'm buying the lawnmower and buying the gas and getting the lawnmower repaired, and Joe, because he likes to cut grass, comes and cuts the grass for us, Joe's an employee. He doesn't cut it for anybody else. He does the work for us, and he's an employee. If you think about the profit motive, and think about it this way, let's go back to Joe and his lawn service. If it's the ABC lawn service, they want to get through with your yard, make it look really good so that they can move on to the next yard. To make it look really good so they can get paid, and they keep moving around. If they're working for more than one place, if there's a profit motive to do the job well and do it fast so I can make more money, they're a contractor. The right of discharge. In the state of Mississippi, people are at-will employees. If they don't like how we're doing our jobs, we can go home right then. If I have a contract, the contract says I've got to give 30-day notice or 60-day or 90-day notice, or I've got to pay them even though they're not going to be working. Look at the right of discharge. Is it that employee contractor's regular business? In other words, if it's a janitor, does the janitor do janitorial work at 6 or 8 different businesses, has their own federal ID number, their own business name, and again, move around with all these other things, then that's their regular business. Now, if they're retired and just need something to do and just got to get out of the house, then they go to the church and do that, and we pay them $50 or $100 a week for cleaning the church. Well, then they're an employee. What's the control? What's the permanency of the relationship? The contract drives the permanency of that relationship. Is it a 1 year? Is it a 2 years? Is it a 30-day? What is it? Whereas when we hire somebody, we normally hire somebody expecting them to be there forever until there's misconduct or they get tired of us and they go find something else to do. What's the permanency of the relationship? But here's the really big one that probably we should talk about first, but I like to talk about it last. What do we believe this relationship is? If we believe that this is a contractual relationship, then have a contract that the trustees have contracted with the business and the finance committee has reviewed. That they give you a bill every month. They don't just automatically get paid on the 1st and the 15th. That they have certain responsibilities that they've got to live up to, as do you, and it's all in writing and all it's signed off, and it's got a time frame attached to it. Put it in writing. That will prove it. Now, I'm just going to tell you on the front end, you're going to lose on nursery workers and musicians, whether it's choir directors or whether it's the musicians. You're going to lose on those two because the IRS has simply said anybody working in the nursery or any musician is considered an employee. So you might as well do it right and move forward. The rest of them, study those tests, determine what really is happening here. If it's an employee, get your I-9W4 state withholding, do all those things. If it's truly a contractual relationship, then get a contract and live into the contract. Employee versus contractor becomes very important. And the billing concepts really can be left in two ways. One, you can have a bill that has to come in every month, and that's normally if that bill can change. Whereas if it's a contract that this person is providing website maintenance for you, they're going to do the same thing every month. So you can set out that you're going to have a $1,200 contract on that payable at $100 a month. But you see the difference. It's inside the contract. The fee for this contract is X number of dollars payable monthly, or it's X number of dollars with this rate per hour billed monthly. Make sure you've got it in writing so that you don't get confused on those billing concepts. I had a guy come in one day, and he actually did our yard work at the office, and he was a friend of mine from years gone by. So he came by and said, David, you hadn't mailed a check for us cutting the grass up at the conference office. I said, I know, I appreciate your donation. He said, oh, it wasn't a donation, we worked. I said, I understand that, I saw you guys working out there. I said, but you didn't send me a bill. He said, oh, did they forget that? I said, did I give you a check? He said, no. I said, then I didn't get a bill. He said, you will have one shortly. He went out to his truck, came back in, handed me the bill, and he got his check. He was happy then. But you see, you've got to live by your contract. And his contract said, payable monthly upon billing. I was waiting on a bill to pay him, and when he presented, we paid. Watch your billing concepts. It's very important to understand that. So as we think about our lay employees, they're either contractors or employees, and we know how to determine the difference. And we said that if we had clergy working in the church that weren't appointed, then they kind of fall in between different areas. They can be employees or they can be clergy. It depends on their duties. Now, so let's think then just a minute about our clergy. And remember, clergy come in two flavors. They're either clergy by being ordained, licensed, or commissioned, or they're lay pastors who have gone through training that have not completed ordination, licensing, or commissioning, but they're lay employees. And so let's think about it for just a minute. When we look at our clergy, we've got to determine the 5-factor test. And the required factor is to be clergy, I must be ordained, commissioned, or licensed. Ordained, commissioned, or licensed. Now, if you're going to have anything ever looked at, the IRS doesn't come look the day after you write payroll. It's normally a year or two after you write payroll. So go ahead, make a copy of the pastor's ordination, of the license, or the commissioning certificate. Put it in your file, a part of your personnel file. Then you've got to look at the balancing effects. While they may be ordained, commissioned, or licensed, are they meeting the balancing effect? And there are 4 of those. And they can throw it one way or the other, toward the lay look or the clergy look. So the balancing factors are simply this. Are they administering the sacraments? If they are, that really sounds like they're clergy. Are they conducting religious worship? They're supposed to be, and if they're conducting worship, then they are clergy. Do they have management responsibility? This is the one that kind of becomes iffy for us. If they have management responsibility, they could be working in a seminary, or they could be in the local church. And are they considered to be a religious leader? I can pretty well promise you, Bishop Swanson or any other bishop is not going to appoint a person to be one of their pastors in one of their churches if they're not a religious leader. So think about it. If they're ordained, licensed, or commissioned, yes, then look at the balancing effects and the sacraments, the worship, the management responsibility, the religious leaders. Look at those, and it can lean more toward clergy or more toward laity. We had a lady that was working in our office that was clergy. She served the local church part-time, but her job in the conference office was to be the receptionist, to receive the people, to get them to the right place, to get the information in, do the things they were supposed to do. It had absolutely nothing with serving sacrament. It had absolutely nothing with conducting religious worship, although she prayed for many of those people that came by. They would talk and she would pray for them, but it was praying for them, not a full religious worship. She certainly had management responsibility, trying to figure out whether to answer the door, whether to answer the phone, what to do at that point, and she definitely was a religious leader. You could tell by her demeanor that she loved God. But when you consider all four of them, she was more a lay-type person. So while she was serving that church part-time, she was clergy. While she was working in the office as the receptionist, she was laity. And so we then applied the rules to her in the right place. So what are these rules that we apply? Well, those get really interesting. And some days I ask myself, are they really special? And I know your clergy ask that question. First of all, they can exclude what they spend on housing and parsonages. Now, hear that exclude. They can exclude their income tax on what they spend on their housing and their parsonage. But they pay Social Security on housing and parsonage. The disadvantage is they pay both sides of that, Social Security and Medicare. And so they get to exclude the parsonage and the housing. But then they end up at 65, 70, 72 years old, and they don't even own a house. Now they got to buy a house. Is that really an advantage to be 72 years old and have to buy a house? Second thing is they're exempt. They are self-employed for Social Security purposes. That means that they pay both sides. So while you and I as a layperson pay 7.65% and our employer matches it, they have to pay 15.3%, and that's on the value of their parsonage. Just how special is that? They're exempt from federal income tax withholdings. Hear the word, withholdings. You don't have to withhold their taxes, but they've got to pay it in by paying their quarterly estimates. Now, if your pastor comes to you and says, look, would you withhold my federal and state income tax? And if you're doing that for others, do it for them. Because the biggest trouble I've seen pastors have is when they realize they're paying both sides of Social Security, their estimates were due, they didn't pay the estimates, nobody told them about it, and now they owe 2 years' worth of taxes out of 1 year of income. So if the pastor comes and says, will you withhold X number of dollars for my federal and X number of dollars for my state? Say, sure, I'd be glad to. And do that for them. It's one of the best things you can do to help your pastor to remain within the tax law. Their job is not to worry about tax laws. Their job is to worry about what God's calling their congregation to do. So if they say, will you withhold it? Say, sure, be glad to. I'll do that. But they sign the W-4 and the state withholding form that they're exempt with an additional withholding of X number of dollars. That way you're living into this rule. And they can be exempt from Social Security coverage. Now, that's a possibility. You've got to sign off to be able to do that. That you do not believe, that you do not believe in socialized medicine. Everybody should pay their own. If you don't believe in socialized medicine, which is what Social Security is and Medicare is, it's socialized funding. If you don't believe in that, then how do you believe in being sure that we care for the least, the last, the lost? How do you justify that when Nancy Pelosi stood up and thanked us in the wee hours of the morning back in the Obama time and thanked us for passing the Affordable Care Act, how do you tie those two things together? So you see, really, we as the United Methodists do believe in the socialized medicine because we want everybody to have access to it. Now, is this something for you to worry about? Absolutely not. This is between the pastor and their heart and the IRS. And so they will make that decision. It's none of your business and it's none of your worry because you have no problem with that. So you really worry about the first three things. The housing, the self-employed, the exempt from income tax. They worry about the Social Security. So I really ask you, are there special rules for clergy or is it some that they probably like to do away with? And quite honestly, I think the first three, if I was clergy, I'd want done away with. So we have to think about our clergy. Are they full-time or are they part-time? We have to think about how they break down their income because of all these different little rules and all that. And we do that through a salary budget compensation sheet. The beauty of that is there's a whole nother session for lay pastors and clergy pastors. There's 8 sessions on the website, and so we're going to just kind of skip over filling those out. It's very important for you as the treasurer at minimum to understand how that works. The Pastor-Parish Relations Committee is going to understand it, and you need to understand it so that we pay the pastor accordingly. There are other videos that you can watch on how to fill those out. So I'll leave that for you to begin to look at. What I do want you to remember is that the reimbursable account is available to lay and clergy employees. Remember that we can no longer deduct on our tax return our business expenses on the Form 1040. That's gone. And so we end up having to pay tax on money that we're spending to do our job unless we have a reimbursable account. That's dealt with inside of the clergy compensation videos that we have that I talked about earlier. Just remember, you need to get one of those set up. It's set up by the Finance Committee, approved by the Admin Council, and we follow that process. Very important for lay and for clergy, because why would we ask somebody to spend their own money to do what we're telling them to do? Let's be sure that we've got one. That 2021 package is really neat. It's an Excel format. It figures itself. You don't have to misadd anymore. You don't have to get them sent back to you. You don't have to remember to answer questions. It asks you the questions as you go along, as you hit each block. So I'm interested in you seeing those and getting those filled out correctly. I'm interested in you being certain that we are doing all that we're supposed to do in the employment law. Again, as the church, as Christians, we should render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and we should follow the rules and the processes that are set out there for us. One last point, the clergy benefit, a lot of people talk about how is that computed, how is that paid. That's computed on this salary expense sheet, but we do that because it is a direct invoice now for the clergy or the lay pastors. It does not apply to your lay employees in the local church. But we do it as a direct invoice, and it's computed on what you pay to the pastor, which becomes more affordable than being apportioned based on what the conference as a whole pays. So look at that on that 2021 clergy budget compensation package and just see how neat that really is. So compensation, oh my goodness, what a confusing mess. You've got laity serving as clergy that are treated as laity, and then you got clergy. I don't know where you could find any more rules in one site and one little set of videos, but boy, did you find them here. So watch it, think about it, and when you get the questions, give me a call.